Hi, Dave Scotland for a Tuts, and welcome to another episode of Nuke in Production. Today we're going to take a look at some of the keying tools in Nuke, and we're going to specifically take a look at some green screen keying. We're going to do sky replacement, and we're also going to have a look at how Nuke handles the common task, or it's common for After Effects users, to do a luma matte. And we're going to try to see what the similarities and differences are between Nuke and After Effects when it comes to luma mattes. So let's get started. So first let's take a look at the tools and where to find them. In the tool menu on the left hand side, you can come down to the eyedropper type icon, and if you click on there, you've got all of your keying options. There's a difference keyer, there's the hue keyer, the IBK gizmo and the IBK color. These two travel together. We're not going to spend any time on these two. I would probably have to do an entire lesson on these two. It's actually quite complicated, but a very capable keying tool. We've got the straight keyer, Primat, Keylight and Ultimat. Now, After Effects users will probably recognize Keylight from the built-in keyer in After Effects, and in fact the manufacturers or the developers of Keylight are actually the foundry, the same people that make Nuke. So many of the features in Keylight you will actually be used to if you have used After Effects before. So the first thing we'll have a look at is the Luma key. Now this is a feature that is used very heavily in After Effects. It's certainly something that I use quite a lot when compositing in an After Effects environment. So what I've been asked in the past is, how do you get Luma keys or Luma mattes working in Nuke, similar to how we get them working in After Effects. So what I'm going to do is actually show you how to get a Luma key working in Nuke, and it's actually quite easy. I'm just going to pull this image out here. We'll work off to the side. And before I do, I'm just going to jump into After Effects and we'll have a look at how we get a Luma key working in After Effects, just in case you haven't seen it working before. And what I've got here is the same image. I'm going to duplicate it down here in the composition, Control D to duplicate. And I'm just going to isolate that, or select that layer. I'm going to right click, color correction, and I'm going to put a tint on it. Turns it into a black and white image. And then I'm just going to color correct and then just put a levels on it. And that allows me to actually tweak exactly where I want that to sit. And if I crank that right down, I can really play with where I want the luminance value to be within the image. And now if I go to my base layer and highlight it, I can use the track matte and actually set it to Luma matte. I'll just put the checkerboard underneath so you can see what's happening. What's actually happening there is the top layer is using the luminance value, the black and white values, to mask out black being invisible, white being visible, to mask out the underlying layer. So what I could actually do is bring down a new version of that and stick it underneath, and that allows me to then take the masked layer and do all sorts of things to it. I could jump in, maybe do a color correction. Let's say we could put a hue and saturation, maybe colorize, bring up the saturation so we can really see it, and just play with the lightness a little bit. And you can see that the red here, or pink in this instance, is actually only happening in the bright areas of the original image, and it's the bright areas that are actually coming through this source matte here. So that's basically how Luma mattes work, and I could certainly flip that by going inverted Luma matte, and then the red will only appear in the darker areas, and I can manipulate which areas in the luminance space are actually dark by manipulating the levels. So I hope you've followed that, and anyone that's familiar with After Effects would certainly be familiar with this process. So how do we do that in Nuke? Well, it's actually quite easy. If I take my layer here, what I'm going to do is add a keyer. So it's just a straight keyer, and you'll notice that by default the keyer is actually set to luminance by default, but it does have other ways of keying. You can see you've got red, green and blue. You've got red screen, green screen, blue screen, luminance key, saturation key, max and min. So these are all different operations for keying out values within the scene, and by default it's set to luminance. So if I change something in the scene, you'll notice that nothing really happens here. Well, nothing that you can see, but certainly if you were looking at the alpha channel information, you would definitely see a difference. So we're going to do that. We're going to change from RGB to alpha. And you can see that what I can actually do is affect the luminance value much the same way that the levels affected the luminance values in After Effects. And I can pull these two handles close together to really get the exact level of luminance that I want, and pull this up even brighter and really clamp in on a specific area of luminance in the image. But I'll leave this off over here for now and get something similar to what we had in After Effects, and that's probably about right. We've got this self-illuminated ring around the teapot, and we've got some white checkers on the shelf here. And how do we use that? Well, what I'm going to do is leave that plugged into my main image, but I'm going to plug my viewer into my EXR file, and you can see this is the alpha channel here. It's the alpha that came in with the EXR, and what we want to do is use the luminance to mask out or matte out some kind of color grade similar to what we did in After Effects. So I'll put this back to RGB, and I'm going to put a color grade in. Hotkey is G, and just plug it in underneath. And we don't see any difference here, but if I throw in to the gain section, I'm just going to gain it up. Or we might even match what we did in After Effects by jumping into the red and maybe saturate that up a little bit as well. Now you'll notice it's happening to the entire image, but we have a mask here, and what I'm going to do is plug that mask into my luminance keyer, and you can see that we're getting the same effect that we were getting in After Effects. And if I double click on that just to bring up the values here, I can fine tune exactly where that luminance value is going to sit and how tight the fall off is. You can see it's very tight here. If I move it up here and then tighten it up, you'll see that it's very tight, but it's in a different area. And so you can certainly manipulate these settings. You can bring this in to bring a bit of a roll off on the top end. Sometimes it gives undesirable results, but sometimes it can really help to have a bit of a roll off the top of the luminance value. So that's pretty much how you create a luma key or a luminance matte in Nuke. It's very simple, and so this can sit there. I can plug this in as many times as I want to now, and I could also pull out as many different luma keys or keyers that I want as well. And the way, let me quickly show you how we can do that. I'm just going to move this up here, and I'm going to put a dot, just slide it over here, and I'm just going to move this over a little bit. I'm just going to put in another keyer, and I'm going to pull that up into my dot, and I might just pull out another dot down here. So you can see you can keep things nice and neat. And then for this one here, if I was to just look at that one and jump into my alpha channel again, and this time I might have a look at the darker areas. And we do that by just inverting the output. So I'm just inverting the output, and then I'm just going to clamp down and try and get a lot of those darker areas. You can see that they're shadow areas in the image, and I think what I'll do is just put a grade node in here as well and plug the mask into that grade node. Come back to my RGB viewer, and in the grade node I think we'll darken down the shadows. So I might go for some cooler shadows in the blues, dark them down. Maybe make them quite obvious so we can see what's actually happening here. So if we zoom in, you can see that we have this purple blue color in the shadows here, and I can always manipulate exactly how that's being shown in the image by manipulating the keyer. So that's an inverted luma key coming out of the same stream as the standard luma key. or the bright colours here and the dark colours coming in here. So hopefully you've understood that, and it's also hopefully pointed out some really nice flow ideas of how to actually get the details from the original footage and pipe them back in through some grade nodes, some blurs, some glows, whatever you might have in mind. So let's go ahead and move on to a simple sky replacement. If we have a look at this church footage, you can see that the background is fairly even, and when I do get a fairly even background, I tend to use the key light keyer, and it's going to give me enough settings to tweak it and get a nice sort of edge out of the image, and then we'll be able to simply put it over our new sky. But there's a couple of tricks I wanted to show you through that process as well. So let's go ahead and grab our footage and drag it off, separate it out over here, and I'll put the sky over here, and we'll have our church here. So add a key light, and straight away you'll see that there's 4 inputs that lead into a key light. There's a BG input, there's an out mat and an in mat, and there's also the source, which is the automatic pipe when you add the key light. So at the moment the source is plugged in, but we haven't chosen our background color yet, and you can see that it's set to black. Now if I just hit A or toggle to the alpha channel, you'll see that there's no alpha channel for the image, or there is an alpha channel but it's the entire image. And we'll go back to RGB. So what our job is to get rid of this blue here, and we're going to have to do it in 1 or 2 steps, not just using the one key light. So let's go ahead and choose this color. What I like to do, I'll show you the reason why I like to do this first. If I click on the eyedropper and then start to select my color, you'll see that flickering that I get, and I get some very unwanted results. And what that is the viewer is actually updating in real time, and then as I'm dragging, it's selecting the new color, which is this black color, and then flickering back and forward between the sky color and the black, and that's why it's giving us some very odd feedback in the viewport. What I'm going to do is actually disconnect or disable the effect first, and then I'm going to click on the eyedropper and click up here. Now I'm going to click close to my edge. Something like that should be fine. Don't go too big as an average, because what it'll do is average all of the pixels within this. I'm using Shift and Control, by the way. If you just hold Control, you can pick 1 pixel at a time, but Shift and Control allows you to drag a marquee, and then it will average all of the pixels within that area. So now that I've got that, what I can actually do is activate the node. And you can see if I switch to my alpha channel that that's not too bad. The edges are looking pretty good. I just need to tidy them up using some of the settings within the key light node. So I'm just going to make sure I've got an area that I can see some detail here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just bring the screen gain up slightly. That's going to get rid of a lot of problems. That's looking pretty good. Not too much. Something like that. And I'm also trying to pay attention to the internal mat as well, and sometimes it's really hard to see this area, so you will have to gamma up and gamma down sometimes. If I gamma down, you can see how bad this actual area is, and if I start moving things around behind this church with a mat that looks like this, with a mask that looks like this, then I'm inevitably going to see that detail coming through. So I need to make sure that this is correct. Just go into your screen mat, clamp the black slightly, but it's the white that we need to clip down to get rid of a lot of those details. Something like that. Now we've probably caused a lot of trouble with our mat as well, with our outside edges. So we do have to be careful to find the right balance here. And a little bit of screen gain instead of this much white clipping is often more preferable. So we're not too concerned with this area down here because we can mask this out. It's really just our edges up here, and of course we've gammed a long way down as well. So there's a little bit of wiggle room when you gammed that hard. So we need to really assess this based on what we see out here. And that's not too bad. It's certainly a good place to start, and we can tweak it from here. Now, you'll notice on the sides we've got some real problems here and also on the other side over here, and that's because the sky in those areas is actually quite bright. So what we're going to do is we're going to break off and create another key light, and this time we're going to just concentrate on those areas. So plug your source in there and swap to our alpha. Actually come back and select our image first, or select our pixels first. Same as before, just deselect or deactivate the node first. Click on the eyedropper, hold shift and control, and I'm going to drag this whole area down here, and then I can activate the node again, and then just a little bit of screen gain. That's not too bad. Just trying to get around this tree a little bit, and maybe clip the white down, and a little bit more black up. Should be okay. Let's just check the other side as well, and that's looking pretty good. So if we look at the alpha channel, that's what we're dealing with there. We're not concerned with what's going on in here. We're only concerned with this little section over here. In fact, we probably just need to bring that white down slightly. That's looking pretty good. And now what I want to do is do a key mix to mix these two alpha channels together. I've got this alpha channel here which has much nicer edges along the top, and I've got this alpha channel here which has the two sections on the sides. So I'm going to use a key mix, and I'm going to plug the B into my original and the A into my sides. In fact, I'll just swap these around so we can read that a little easier. I like to try to keep my B pipes running down this right hand side of the stream. And at the moment nothing's really happened there, because what I need to do is plug in a mask to let the key mix know which sections of this mask. At the moment it's adding the whole lot, but I only want this little section here and here to add to the previous mask or the previous alpha. So I'm just going to plug in a roto, and I'm just going to do a couple of quick rectangles. So I'm just looking at this section over here, and I'll just open up a little bit of fall off or feather, and I'll create in that same roto. I'm going to create another one on the right hand side, and same again, just a little bit of a feather is going to make that blend in a little bit when the add mix adds both of the alpha channels. So now I just take the mask and plug it in to that roto shape, and if we have a look at that now, what we're left with is our original shape, plus it's gotten rid of the ugliness in these sections over here and here, and it's coming along pretty nicely. So now what we want to do, if I look at my alpha channel, I also have this problem in here, and the way to get rid of that is to actually plug in a roto node into the in mat of my original keyer. And in fact both keyers, I'm going to plug it into the in mat. And so if I double click here, you can see down the bottom here I've got an in mat component and an out mat component, and I can set them to luminance, inverted, alpha and inverted. So I'm just going to do another roto, and this roto, I'm just going to use the pen tool. It's just getting rid of all of this area that I don't need. Come across and close it off. And then I'm going to plug the in mat into that roto, and the same with the other keyer. So both keyers are plugged into the in mat, and then I'm just going to switch the in mat to alpha, and I can do that on both in mat alpha. And you can see that I'm actually got a nice clean key. The inside is taken care of, the outside, the edges are fine, and I've got the sky out on the side there. So the next thing I need to do is to comp it over the replacement sky. So we're just going to hit a merge, M for merge. And if I just do an A over B here and plug this in, go back to my RGB, this is not the best method of working, and it's definitely not the way most people work when they're doing this type of operation. What they try to do, and what is the best way to do this type of operation, is to separate this off to one side, use it as a source for the alpha only, because usually what happens, and this is the main reason why I tend to do this, is that this operation over here, this whole section, and this is actually quite simple, but it can become quite complicated. Part of this process can often destroy the red, green and blue information in this area here that we're trying to keep. And sometimes in order to get the best mask, we can destroy the red, green and blue information. Now, if all we're trying to do is create an alpha channel, then we really shouldn't care about the red, green and blue information. So this is what we actually do instead. I'm just going to disconnect this. I'm going to connect it straight to my original church, and you can see it comes up as an add whenever there's no alpha channel, and a merge over pretty much shows up as an add. And instead of piping straight in, what I'm going to do is put a copy node. I'm just going to put a copy node into that stream. Now it comes up with an error because a copy requires an alpha channel. Plug the A pipe into the key mix. Just going to bring this down so we can see what we're doing. And straight away you can see that the clouds in the background have blown right out, and that's because there's no pre-multiplication coming out of this process over here. So we need to add a pre-mult to pre-mult the alpha by the RGBA. And I'm just going to bring my viewer over so that it's a little closer to the process. And now you'll see that we have our original church, and if I just put a dot node so we can see that a little clearer, this is the original church coming down into the copy node. The copy node is taking the alpha channel from the A pipe, which is this whole section over here, and it's copying it to the B channel of the copy node, which is here. And the B channel, there is no alpha in this, so all we're doing is we're adding this alpha to a non-existent alpha, and then piping that out, piping the product of that out into the merge node. And the beauty of this process is I can manipulate the edge detail without destroying any of the RGB process, and I can also fine-tune the RGB values without destroying any of the alpha through this process over here. So a little bit convoluted, but when the penny drops, when you actually understand this and get this going for the first time, you'll always work this way, because it is a very powerful way to work, and it is definitely the preferred way to work when doing this type of operation. And green screen characters and actors is exactly the same. So what I'm going to do now is just add a light wrap, and I'm just going to pull this down out of the road a little bit. And the way a light wrap works in Nuke is it has an A, whoops, just unplug that. It has an A and a B pipe, and the A pipe is the foreground element and the B pipe is the background. So if I just plug this in temporarily and show you what it does, I'm going to plug the A into the pre-mult, and I'm going to plug the B into the background. We'll just have a look at what it does. And at the moment we can't really see too much going on there until we start to tweak the intensity and maybe go generate wrap only is the best way for you to really see what's happening. And I can tweak the diffuse by bringing it down so that it's a little tighter around the edge of the building. And then I can also bring the intensity down so that it's not so dominant in the shot. And maybe soften this a little bit. You can also tweak the luma tolerance, which basically affects, notice that with the luma tolerance down, that I'm getting blue sky around here and the bright areas from the clouds, but when I tweak it up, I only get the bright areas from the clouds. So if you've got a bright light or some sort of bright object behind your green screen subject, then you can use the luma tolerance to bloom out just around those brighter areas. But I'm going to keep it fairly balanced, and then try and work it so that we can really understand what's going on here. I'm just going to unplug off there, unplug, keep it down here. That's probably going to work okay, and I might just move this off so that we can run a pipe down here. There we go. And then I've just put a merge underneath my main stream, and I'm going to make this one a screen, and we'll pipe into there and see how we've gone. So if I hide and unhide that or disconnect, you can see that we're just getting a little bit of light bloom coming around the edges. Just makes just a subtle amount of bloom that's coming around. A bit of light wrap. I can double click and maybe bring the intensity of that up slightly. Just have a bit of a look. You can definitely see when you switch that on and off how much of a difference it makes. Probably gone a little bit too hard on it. That's probably pretty good. So definitely have a play with these files and see if you can get this process up and running. Knowing how to do a good sky replacement to get a good clean plate before you do more demanding compositing is it's a great skill to have, and you definitely should be able to do this process over here where you're isolating the alpha channel using multiple sections of the background, or multiple keyers. This doesn't necessarily need to be a key light and a key light. It could be a key light and a keyer. You can use a multitude of keyers to get the best edge and internal detail for an alpha channel, and then you just pipe it out through a copy node using the RGB channels coming in to the B and the alpha channels coming into the A, and then you pre-mult that out and over the top of your background. So 9.9 times out of 10 this system works exactly as I've shown you, but the more you can play with it, the more you'll be ready for any of the curveballs that can be thrown at you when you're doing this type of keying. So definitely give that a go. So the last example I wanted to show you was a green screen process, and there's a lot of different ways to get a green screen key working in Nuke, and I'm just going to show you one, but rest assured that no matter what type of circumstances you have when it comes to green screen, whether it's an evenly lit green or whether there's way too much spill light, the tools within Nuke are fantastic for removing green screen, and I've even gone so far as to use Nuke to remove any green screen even if I'm working on a project using After Effects or any other tool, because of the tools within Nuke when it comes to green screen keying. So there are a lot of tools there. It's just practice to work out what tool to use in what situation. Today I'm just going to show you a Primat process using the Primat node to get a green screen key on this character. This is the background we're going to use. Quite a simple background. It's quite easy to read where the horizon line is using the perspective lines within the image. So we're going to be able to line her up in that image background pretty easily. Let's get started with a Primat. So the way a Primat works is it's quite procedural in nature. In the actions section here, you first select a background color, and then you clean the background noise, then you clean the foreground noise. You go through these until you ultimately get what you need, and you step through them procedurally. It's quite okay though to come back and fine tune some previous ones, but bear in mind that once you start dancing around in this list, you will start to undo some good work that you may have had. And I'm going to start with the Smart Select here. Go with an auto compute. And then if I come in here and hit A to have a look at the alpha channel, what we do now is we look at the clean background noise, and we can hold down Control and start clicking on some of these background pixels that are visible in the mask. And if we look at that in RGB space, you can see we're starting to get a pretty good mask. Now, if we go back to alpha, if you gamma up and down, you can start to see the problems that are in the mask. If I gamma right up, you can see that there's quite a lot of pixels here that I've left behind. and it will help just to fine tune some of these problem areas around here. Be careful selecting background pixels that are too close to your image detail, because you will start to decay the edge of the mask. Just basically go around and select any of these stray pixels around the edges, or that could be free floating. Let's see if we can find one. We're not concerned with up in here, because we can certainly garbage mask that process, and we can gamma all the way down to really get a read on some of these other areas on the inside of the mask. So we can now change to clean foreground noise, and we can come in and start selecting some of these foreground pixels as well. So I might just tidy these up. Now you can actually hold down Control and Shift and draw a section, but you do have to be careful that sometimes that can actually cause quite a lot of problems and get a lot of jitter in the edge of your masks, because you're really opening up quite a large range. I'm going to leave this because it's actually a mirrored surface in our image, and of course we're going to get green on this. So I try to, whenever there's any sort of chrome or mirrored surface, I try to do a mask around that rather than using a green screen, because it will be a perfect green. So we're still seeing quite a lot of problems here. Now it is quite low res imagery. It's this shot is actually 720, 1280 720. So I don't want to go too tight on the mask without first having a look at how it looks over the image with a little bit of hue correction as well. So don't feel that you have to go in and start pulling out every green pixel, because a lot of those pixels should stay there because they are indeed parts of the character. They just happen to be green. So we do have to be careful there. So let's go ahead and put this over our and slap it over our background. So I'm just going to put a merge, and I'll pipe that into my Primat, and we'll have a look at it. That's reading not too bad. Let's have a look at our read nodes. Just going to reformat this background to make it a little easier on ourselves. So I'm just going to put in a reformat, mainly because the background was actually 1080. We'll leave this for now, even though I'll probably move this character and reline them up in the space a little bit. But you can see that the green that we were really picking up against the black is not quite as bad as we thought. So let's do this mix properly. At the moment this Primat is in line, and I don't want it to be in line. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of doing a copy, I'm actually going to do an add mix. So I'm going to take the Primat here, and just going to put in an add mix. I'm going to pipe the B pipe into here. I'm going to pipe the A pipe into the add mix, and then I'll pipe the add mix into my main comp, and you'll see that we get this semi-transparent green area here, and that's because we haven't got any pre-multiplication going on. So what I'm going to do is, under the add mix, is do a pre-mult, and that gets rid of that process, and it pre-multiplies the alpha by the RGBA. So that's not looking too bad. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to move the pre-mult down, and before the pre-mult I'm going to do a little bit of hue correction here. So I'm just going to do a hue correct. I'm just going to have a look at these values in here and see if we can sort of work them out exactly what they are. So I'm just going to have a look at my green suppression, and I'm going to hold Control and Shift. I'm just going to try to pick up this value here, so it's somewhere in here, and I'm just going to pull that value down probably about there. You've got to be careful, don't go too far with it, because you can break the pixel values in the other channels. I'm just going to pull this a little wider, this one as well, and this one I'm just going to widen this out slightly, just using my control. So as far as green is concerned, that's not too bad, but I'm just going to, I've got a little bit of red glow that's going on there as well. So I'm just going to pull this out a little wide. I'm getting a little bit of a magenta feel in there. And that's not too bad. So I think we're working okay now. And after that one, I'm just going to put a saturation, because I think the character needs to be desaturated a little bit in that space, in that color space. That's not working too bad. And then I'm also going to put let's put a transform. Let's go after the pre-mult with a transform, because I just want to reposition this character in the shot. And let's pull some scale down as well. That's working pretty well. Now we also need to do a bit of a garbage mask here. So I'm going to do the garbage mask with my merge. In fact, I'll do it over here with this merge here. So I'm just going to put a roto, and we'll do a garbage mask, really simple. And then I'm just going to pipe that into the mask here. Whoop. There we go. And that also gets rid of the counter numbers. And let's go ahead and just do a quick playback. Let's hide these overlays. We'll do a quick playback, and just to see if we're getting any dancing pixels. It's always best practice to do a quick playback. You will get locked into doing a lot of work with the play button sitting there not being touched, and that's not a very safe way to work. It's great for Photoshop, but it's no good for full motion compositing. You've got to make sure that your work is actually working in full motion sense. So if we have a look there, we're getting a pretty good playback, but I think what we're missing is a little bit of light wrap. So just like our last example, I'm going to work a bit of light wrap into the scene. So let's add a light wrap node, and I'm going to plug, as I did before, just going to plug the A into this transform, and I'll plug the B into the original background image. We'll just have a look at what that's looking like, and we'll bring up a little bit of intensity, put the diffuse down, and that's working pretty well. So let's go ahead and put a merge after our original merge. We'll pipe this one in, and this one is actually going to be a screen. If we come in here, have a little bit of a look, we can fine tune this light wrap. And that's looking pretty good. I might even bring up a little bit of tolerance on this one. And if we hide and unhide that merge, you can see that we're just getting a little bit of light wrapping around, especially in the hair up here, which is great. It's taking away that dark edge there, which is a little bit of a cinematic issue. And I might even just bring down our luma tolerance a little bit. We're losing a bit of detail on the back, on the darker sides. And maybe bring the intensity up slightly. And that's working pretty well. And let's tweak the saturation just slightly. Let's bring it down. That's pretty good. And after the saturation, I might just do a grade as well. And in fact, what I'll do with this is switch it off, come in here, and I'm going to crank down the gamma, crank up the exposure. What I'm trying to do is find the brightest point on the character. And it looks like it's on her collar. It's this area here. So I'm going to click on the white point, and I'm just going to select these pixels here. And the reason why I switched it off is that live update issue that I showed you before. You do get some problems when you do it that way. And now I'm just going to crank up in the other direction and try and find the darkest area on our character. It looks to me like it's somewhere in her shirt here, down here. So this time it's the black point. And we've now got our black and white point. Zoom out, reset these both back to their normal values and switch on. And you can tell if I switch that on and off that we're getting, look at the difference in the white coat. That's where the real difference is, because we've set the white point based on something that is far more believable, and it's brought it in, it's brought the white point and the black point into the same sort of space as the background. Now, even though the background, we haven't done the same process with the grade node, it has actually brought it into line a little bit now. Now when I tweak these settings over here, what I want to do is just tweak the multiplication a little bit, make it a little brighter, but then also a gamma down slightly, because I want a little bit of contrast in our character. And that's working pretty well. There's some good contrast in the background image, and I don't want not too much contrast. I'll just bring that back slightly. But you can see if I switch that grade on and off, how much of a difference it makes. She's so washed out here, her highs and lows are so washed out, whereas now we're getting some nice highlights like the room in the background, and that's working pretty well. I'll probably jump into that desaturation now and just work a little bit more of that saturation out. And now the last thing I want to do is I'm just going to take the background image, and after the reformat, I'm just going to put in a blur node. Just going to plug it in here. Now I'm putting it in after the reformat because I want the light wrap to actually be into the reformat and not into the blur node. Because all I'm trying to do is just offer a little bit of camera blur into the background without it going too silly. Something like that is looking pretty good. We do have to be careful because we do have a foreground object here. So we just want a little bit there. And I could also just do a quick roto and mask out this object here in the foreground. So just do this facing area here, and then I'm just going to pull a little bit of fall off so that will fall off across the surface and gradually get blurry across the surface back here. Something like that should do us. And then I'm just going to use that as my mask into my blur. So I'm just going to crank the blur so I can really see what's going on. And I'm going to invert my mask. There we go. And so now when I bring that blur back, I'll switch off the roto. I'll bring the blur back to something that's a little bit more believable. You'll see that the foreground object is in the same sort of Z plane as our character, as it should be. So let's play that through. And I think the green screen process is working well. We've got a nice edge. We're getting hair detail here, and we're getting no dancing pixelated dancing edges around the edge of the character. And in fact, it's actually working quite nice. There's no semi-transparency. I can see all the way through. There is a noise in the character that's missing here, and that's one step I won't cover here today. Ideally, what I would do is try to match the noise, but over the top of the background only, and try to match the background noise to her noise. But I think you'll find that that's a pretty good comp, albeit very quick. There are certainly some areas where I would tidy it up given a little bit more time, but I really hope that you get a chance to play with this footage and get it up and running, especially using the Primat. It's a fantastic tool. I use it quite a bit. In fact, most of the time I'm using the Primat and the key light in conjunction with one another to get a perfect green or blue screen matte, and rarely will one keying solution fit the circumstances. You'll tend to have to use more than one option to get things working. So definitely try this out. Have a go with the light wrap. Definitely try to get the background and the foreground to match. Do a little bit of color correction, and don't forget your pre-mults in order to make sure everything works. That's it for me. Until next time, bye for now.